Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Samach Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Laura Roshavsky in loving memory of her mother, Evelyn Margolis, on her second yahrzeit. Tomorrow, just a small announcement, we'll be back to regular Zoom after a nice break for the summer. So anyone who's missing Zoom, tomorrow we're back to normal. Okay, we're going to get started now from the bottom of Samach Vav Amud. We have this machloket Abaye and Rava. Is recha milta or not? Is smell, does it, right, when it, let's say there's some smell wafting from something and it goes into something else, and if the smell was something that's forbidden, does it forbid the other item or not? And we saw as a machloket Abaye and Rava, and Rav Mary brought machloket Tanaim and said, look, you can see from this, it was actually a Mishnah. I wasn't sure, I think last time, whether it was a Mishnah or not. It's a Mishnah in Trumot, that if you have hot bread that comes out of the oven and you put it on top of a barrel of truma, of wine, the truma wine goes into the bread, according to Rabbi Meir, and he forbids it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he permits it. So Rabbi Yossi, we're not going to deal with his opinion right now. He said it depends on what kind of bread. But the main point is, the one who forbids it, Rabbi Meir, must be like Abaye, that recha is something of significance, and the one who permits it thinks not. So then Abaye came and said, so according to Rava, there's no way to understand it other than saying this is the machloket. But Abaye could actually explain that everyone agrees with him, because wasn't it said about this, and then he quoted Rabbi Bar Bachan in the name of Rish Lakish, that it was really hot bread, and the barrel was open. Everybody agrees, Divra kol asura. Everybody forbids, because everybody thinks recha is significant. And if the bread was cold and the barrel was sealed, everybody agrees that it's permitted, because of course nothing transferred. Lo nechleku, what was the machloket about? If the bread was hot, but the barrel was closed, then we have a machloket. So basically what we're going to say is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both agree that recha is significant, according to Abaye. However, if the barrel was closed, the recha isn't really going to come into the bread, according to Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Meir still thinks it can. Now, how this is, it's a really good question. If the barrel is really sealed, maybe they just thought that the coverings of the barrel weren't strong enough, and they were concerned with some of the flavor of the wine wafting into the bread, if the bread is hot, or if the bread is cold and the barrel is open, right? Usually we assume that things get transferred because of heat. In this case, again, it's a machloket. Rabbi Meir thinks still the wafting smell from the wine will still potentially go into cold bread, and Rabbi Yehuda thinks not, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda permits. In our case that we talked about earlier, the case of Rav and Abaye, about the recha milta or not milta, where we had that case of the, just remembering what it was called, right? We had the case of the batiha, right? Where we had the smell, right? The opening in the barrel and the Jew smelling the wine of the idolater. So that's considered like hot bread, right? The way the smell comes up of the wine through that hole, it's similar to the case of hot bread and the open barrel. And therefore, in that case, the way Abaye explained it is there's really no machloket, they all agree. Now we're going back to the Mishnah and back to this issue of notein tam lifgam. Okay, if something gives flavor, but the flavor is bad, right? So there's isser, let's say vinegar, which was made from, right, which was originally yein nesech, it's offered as a libation. It gives bad taste to something. We're going to say that, right, if it falls into a mixture, gives a bad taste, it's right, or we had the truth is the case really wasn't the vinegar case that we were discussing in the Mishnah. The case was the wine falling on top of the grapes, or the different situations that we saw there. Right, we had the grogrot, and then the wine fell on top of them, and then they said it was fine, right? And then it all depends, does it give good taste or bad taste? So zakla kosher ben hanato benotein tam, right? If you enjoy the flavor that it gives, then it's a problem. If you don't enjoy the flavor, it's bad flavor, then it's not a problem. And that's really the topic we're going to discuss today. It's a very classic case of laws of kashrut. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Hachi Hilchatan. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, this is how we paskin. ואמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל, לא שנו אלא שנפל לתוך גריסין רותחים, אבל נפל לתוך גריסים צוננים והרתיחן, נעשה כמי שהשפיע ולבסוף פגם ועשו. Let's explain these cases. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel now, after he said this is how we hold, he says that's when the vinegar, let's say it's vinegar, that's problematic vinegar, it falls onto grisim, which are cracked beans that are boiled. Okay, now if vinegar falls on them when they're boiling, it gives bad flavor. Aval, but what if, and we're going to learn something about vinegar and cracked beans if you were interested, if it falls into grisim tsonanim, cold cracked beans, and at that point, actually, it's good, it makes it taste better. But then you boil them, okay, if you're planning, let's say, to boil those beans, and then you boil them, and at that point, it's bad taste. So the vinegar tastes bad now is the final finished product. It's really like something that first made it taste better, then later made it taste worse. But since when it originally fell in, it actually tastes good, that's going to be forbidden. And we're not going to call that a case of notein tam lifgam that we're going to permit. Okay, so again, what this means is if it down the road gives bad taste, but at the moment that it falls in, it's good, it actually enhances the flavor. The flavor is good for it, like vinegar into cold cracked beans, then we're actually going to say it's forbidden because that gave good flavor originally, even though later when we boiled it, it gave it bad taste. V'chein kiata Ravin, and when Ravin came from Israel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he passed down the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who passed down the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela, and he said this exact same thing, which is, in other words, the point being, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, and in Israel they were saying it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Lo shanu ela shenafal letoch grisim rotchim. It's going to be the exact same thing. It's only if it falls into the beans when they're boiling, which gives bad taste right away. But if they fell into the cold beans and then you boil them, so again, that's like something that originally gave it good flavor and only later gave it bad flavor, and that's going to be forbidden. And likewise, Ki'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Israel, now the assumption is he said the exact same thing that we just said. They don't even bother to say it. But he added, and he said, by the way, if you want to hear more about this dish of the vinegar on the cold cracked beans being a good thing, in Sipori on Erev Shabbat, they used to prepare these. They used to prepare cracked beans with vinegar. The cracked beans were cold, and Korim otam shachalaim, and they call them shachalaim, which is cress, because it's not cress. Cress is a certain type of vegetable, a bitter vegetable that they would add vinegar to it when it was cold. That's how they would prepare it. So they prepared these beans in the same way, and they were actually, it was, a delicacy or I don't know what, but it was good. They ate it, and they called it cress. That's just an aside because cress is prepared in a similar manner. Okay, that was just a point being this people do. Okay, now we're going to have two versions of Rish Lakish, which he says something about notein tam lifgam, and Rashi kind of clarifies things for us. The first version, he's being more stringent about it, and in the second reading of Rish Lakish, he's being more lenient about it. So we're going to see. Notein tam lifgam sha'amru. Okay, we're going to go back to this word sha'amru. Okay, the notein tam lifgam, that's going to be much later in the Shiur. When they say notein tam lifgam, something gives bad flavor and it will be permitted. That they said, meaning this whole thing that the rabbis say that notein tam lifgam is going to be permitted. Lo she'yomru k'tera zo chasera melach, yitera melach, chasera tavlin, yitera tavlin. Okay, we all know that food, there's too much salt or not enough salt. Okay, chasera melach, it's missing salt. Or yitera melach, or it's got too much salt. Or chasera tavlin, it's missing spices. Or it's got too much spices. Okay, now we're not talking about, when we say it's notein tam lifgam, we're not talking about a dish that was already kind of not so great because it was missing salt or missing spice. And then you added the vinegar and it really made it bad because the combination of the salt, the lack of salt, and the vinegar made it really bad. That's not notein tam lifgam because that was already bad in and of itself. And it sounds like the vinegar, by adding it to something that already wasn't so good to begin with, right, really turned it into something bad. But it's much worse specifically because it had no salt or too much salt or not enough spice or too much spice. The only time, according to the first version of Rish Lakish, and that's why it's a chumrah, it's a stringency. The only time we're going to permit notein tam lifgam is specifically if it was perfectly good before, it was spiced just the right way. And only because you added the vinegar, that in and of itself messed up the dish. But if the dish was already bad to begin with, and this just made it worse, that's not going to be notein tam lifgam that we're going to permit because it was already bad to begin with. Amar Rish Lakish, but some people say Rish Lakish said, this is the one version, Lekula, notein tam lifgam shambru. When they said, again, when the rabbi said notein tam lifgam is going to be permitted, ein omrim, we don't say that הכתרה הזו חסרה מלח, יתרה מלח, חסרה תבלין, יתרה תבלין. אלא, השתמיה הפגמה. We don't say, oh, well, the dish anyway is missing salt, or it's got too much salt, or anyway missing spices, or too much spices, meaning the exact what we just said a minute ago. We don't say, oh, well, anyway, it was bad, so therefore notein tam lifgam doesn't work. No. Ela hashtamia hapagma. The fact is, even though it was missing salt and tasted pretty bad to begin with, the fact that we now have vinegar makes it much worse. That's going to be forbidden because hapagma, because when you added the vinegar, it made it worse. So the vinegar is not considered, again, this is notein tam lifgam, it gave bad taste to it, even though it was already bad, but this made it taste even worse. That's going to be also a case of notein tam lifgam. So we have opposite versions of Rish Lakish. If it's not only the vinegar, but also something that was already missing or too much of it was in it before and it already wasn't tasting good, is that going to be a case of notein tam lifgam when we add this vinegar and it tastes worse, or is it not? That's the two versions of Rish Lakish. We'll come back to this in a bit. Now, Amar Rabbi Yavahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he's going to bring some rules about, again, these are basic laws of kashrut. Kol sheta'amo umamasho asul, lokin alav. Okay, if ta'amo umamasho, okay, we have meat falls into, okay, or milk falls into meat, or meat falls into milk. Let's say meat falls into a dairy soup. Now, if the meat is still in there, okay, you have tam, it gives flavor, and mamash, and it's still physically there, and it's forbidden. Lokin alav, if you eat that, you will get lashes for that. That's basically eating something forbidden, okay? Or it doesn't have to be, it could be a non-kosher meat with another piece of meat, like a piece of non-kosher meat falls into a meat stew. And then you eat that meat stew, and the taste of the meat is there, the actual piece of meat is there, and it's forbidden, and you get lashes. Now, you're only going to get lashes if you eat an olive bulk's worth of the meat in an amount of time that it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread, okay, which ranges from 4 to 9 minutes, according to the different opinions. That's when you're going to be liable by Torah law and get lashes for it. But turning now to Amabet, ta'amo velo mamasho. What if your meat falls into your pot of soup, or your meat falls into a stew, a meat stew, your non-kosher meat falls into the meat stew. You take out the piece of non-kosher meat, but it already added taste to it, okay? So now it's taste, the taste of it is in there. So that's ta'amo velo mamasho, but it's not actually there. Asul ve'ein lokin alav. Now this is still forbidden to eat, but you don't get lashes for it. Now this is a big debate by the Rishonim about whether this is forbidden by Torah law. However, you don't get lashes because you're missing the actual item of Isur. Or some people say it's only d'Rabbanan. Okay, this is what we call, and we're going to get to this in laws of kashrut in Masechet Chulin. It's called ta'am ki'ikar. Flavor is as if the item's there, although it's not completely as if, right? That's the whole ta'am ki'ikar. It's as if the item's there, but since it's not actually there in reality, you're not going to get lashes for it. Ve'im riba ta'am lifgam, and if it added more bad taste to the food, mutal. If this meat made it taste awful, let's say the meat was spoiled and it gave a bad taste to it, then it will be permitted. Now the language im riba ta'am lifgam, if it added bad taste, okay, we're gonna talk about this in a second. The Gemara says, "V'lema im natan ta'am lifgam mutar." Why don't you just say if it gave bad taste, like we've been saying all along? Notein ta'am lifgam is permitted. So they say, well, they want to teach you something additional. Hakamashma, and this is going to go back to the second version of Rish Lakish. It came to teach you to afagav diika milia achrin niata depagme bahade. Even though there was something else bad already there, like for example, there was too much salt, not enough salt, too much spice, not enough spice. Okay, even though there was something else, right? Then it's still going to be no tain tam l'fgam, and that's what we said im riba. If it adds more bad taste to something that's already got bad taste, and obviously, by the way, if it doesn't add, but right, it didn't have any bad taste to begin with. Obviously, that's no tain tam l'fgam if the meat itself gave it bad taste. But even if it already had bad taste because it was missing salt, and then it made it even worse, it's still going to be permitted, and that's hilchataka lishna batra to Rish Lakish. That's like the second version of Rish Lakish. Amar Rav Kahana. We're not done with Rish Lakish, though we're going to come back to one more point about Rish Lakish in a second. Rav Kahana now says, Midivrei kula, from everything everybody said in the sugya so far, nilmad notein tam l'fgam mutal, right? Basically, all the opinions we saw of the Amoraim seem to say, if it gives bad flavor, right? It gives a bad taste, it's permitted. That's what we saw. We saw Shmuel said it. We saw Rabbi Yochanan said it, right? We were quoted all these things. And okay, that's giving bad taste. Giving bad taste is permitted. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, I'm not sure everybody. And now we're going to go back to those words Rish Lakish said that I pointed out in the beginning. Ella. But he says, Bishlama mikulu l'chai. All the other opinions you quoted, I get. You're right. They all said no tain tam l'fgam is permitted. Ella de Rish Lakish, amru ka'amal, v'leilo svirale. Let's go back to the language of Rish Lakish, not what he said, but how he said it. He started off in both versions, okay, no tain tam l'fgam she'amru. The no tain tam l'fgam, this whole idea that no tain tam l'fgam, if it gives bad flavor, it actually is permitted. Again, just to be really clear, we're talking about forbidden item falls into permitted item. The forbidden item gives a taste, but the taste is bad, then it's permitted. The whole mixture is going to be permitted. Now, this is only, right? Now, notice what he says. The noten tam lifgam she'amru, that they said. So it comes about, why do you say that they said? Why don't you just say noten tam lifgam? He said the noten tam lifgam that they were talking about sounds like he's quoting the rabbis, but he doesn't hold that way necessarily. In other words, what Rabbi is saying is, Rav Kana, you're saying everybody holds this way. Not clear. Maybe Rish Lakish disagreed, and he was just saying, according to you who holds this way, well, and then we have the two versions of Rish Lakish where he goes with it, either a more strict opinion about it or a more lenient opinion about it. So that's the first thing. So Rav Kana says, from everybody, it seems like no tain tam l'fgam is permitted. Abai said not necessarily everybody, maybe Rish Lakish disagrees. Then we're going to say another thing about this point, the fact that Rav Kahana says this, and it's interesting because this goes back on Daf Lamed Zayin, I think it was, when we were talking about Pat Akum or Lamed Hey, I forgot what Daf, but when we were talking about the bread of the Akum, and there we said that Rav Kahana actually quoted Rabbi Yochanan as saying, the pot wasn't permitted by the court. And then they said, oh, it sounds like the fact that you had to say this, it sounds like someone did permit it. Is that true? And then they said, yes, it is true. So there were different possible ways of reading that line. We're going to do the same thing here. So Michlal, from the fact that Rav Kahana said, it from all the things that everybody said, you could say that no tain tam l'fgam is permitted. Michlal di'ikalaman da'amar no tain tam l'fgam asur. It sounds like somebody thinks that there's someone who thinks it's forbidden. And is there really someone who thinks that Rav Kahana had to get up and say this? Right? Because people don't make these statements. Oh, from everything we saw, it seems no tain tam l'fgam is permitted. It's obvious. So it must be that somebody thought it was forbidden. And is there really someone who thinks it's forbidden, that if it gives bad flavor, it's forbidden? To which the Gemara answers, yeah, in fact, there is someone who says that. V'hatanya says in a Braita, echad noten tam l'fgam, ve'echad noten tam l'shevach asur. Whether it gives good flavor or whether it gives bad flavor, it's forbidden. That's Divrei Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is the one actually who, now we're going to see that Rav Kahana was saying everybody seems all this way because there's really someone who doesn't, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says whether it gives good taste or bad taste, it's going to be forbidden no matter what, because there's isur in it. That's actually kind of intuitive, right? So what if it gives bad flavor? That's like a big chiddush. If it gives bad taste, well, it's going to be permitted. But right, the logic would state there's isur, right? That there was flavor. If we say flavor is ki'ikar, it's important, then there's flavor that's Isser. What's the difference if it gives bad taste or good taste? Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Meir, and that's the opinion everybody holds by, which is l'sheva chasur l'fgam mutal. If it gives good flavor, it's forbidden. If it gives bad flavor, then it's not forbidden because you don't want the taste, right? So if you don't want the taste, so it's as if it's really not there, right? Because it gives bad taste. Now they want to know, where do we get this from? My Tama de Rabbi Meir. Where does Rabbi Meir get his opinion from? Gamar migiulei ovdei kochavim. He learns it from, if you remember in the Torah, you have to kosher the utensils of Gentiles. Where do we get it from? Right? From the whole war they had with the Midianim, and then they killed them, and then they took their stuff, and they had to kosher it. Right? They had to kosher it because the taste was forbidden. Now, the assumption is that must have been, okay, now here we get to basic laws of kashrut. When do we assume something's notein tam lifgam? After 24-hour passes from its last use. Now, we assume if they had to kosher all the utensils of the Midyanim, it must be 24 hours have passed, and they still had to kosher them. So that would prove Rabbi Meir's point that even though it gives bad taste, it's still forbidden. So they say, right, so just like there, was it not notein tam lifgam va'asar rachman, and the Torah forbade, so hachanami lo shna, so we'll say the same thing here. V'idach, so what does Rabbi Shimon say about the giulei of their kovim? They had to kosher all their pots and pans, even though they hadn't been used in 24 hours, which means equals gives bad flavor. So they say, Kid Rav Huna b'rei Rav Chia, he held like Rav Huna, the son of Rav Chia. Ta'amar Rav Huna b'rei Rav Chia, as he said, Lo asra Torah el k'dera bat yoma. Actually, the Torah only forbade the utensils that we used within the last 24 hours. Okay, delo lifgamu, and that doesn't give bad flavor. So there's two approaches right now. Rabbi Meir, who holds they had to kosher everything, and Rabbi Shimon, who holds no, they only had to kosher the things that we used within the last 24 hours, based on the statement of Rav Huna b'rei Rav Chia. To which we're now going to go back to Rabbi Meir. Maybe he's right about that. Maybe they really only had to kosher some of those things that were used within the last 24 hours. How do you explain that? If you think notein tam lifgam is a sul. To which idach, so what's Rabbi Meir going to say? Now, this assumption we made before about 24 hours equals notein tam lifgam, but within 24 hours it's giving good taste, right? Whatever was absorbed and comes out is still fresh, kind of thing. Rabbi Meir says, what do you mean? No, anything absorbed in the pot that comes out later, even if it's within 24 hours, it's still going to have some bad taste to it. And the fact that it has bad taste and they still had to kosher all the utensils proves my point. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Now we go back to Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Shimon, my time. So what's Rabbi Shimon's reason? In other words, so far we proved Rabbi Meir's reason. Rabbi Meir said, Giulei of kochavim, the fact that they had to kosher all those utensils proves that notein tam lifgam is forbidden. Rabbi Shimon, where does he get that notein tam lifgam is permitted? Tanya, he's going to learn it from laws of nevela. What does it say about nevela, which is non-kosher meat? Now, notice until now we've been talking about something giving taste into something else in a tarovet, in a combination. Something of isur fell into something of heter, right? Something not permitted fell into something that's permitted. Now he's going to explain this concept of notein tam lifgam is going to be permitted from a different law entirely, but having to do with kashrut, but not mixed substances, heter and isur. Lo tuchlu kol nevela. Don't eat nevela, right? Animals that died or were not slaughtered properly. Lagel asher b'sharecha, okay, titnena, etc. Give it to the ger in your gates, okay? Meaning the ger toshav, not a ger who's a full-fledged convert, but the ger toshav that we learned about not so long ago. Kol haru'uya lager, kruya nevela, she'en ru'uya lager, en kruya nevela. It's only a nevela, which is forbidden by a lo taseh in the Torah to eat, if it can be eaten by a ger. That's the drasha. If it can't be eaten by a ger, then it's not a nevela. In other words, if it's not even edible, because it can't be eaten by someone, then it's not food, then it's not forbidden, which proves that notein tam lifgam is going to be permitted because that's not really food. Okay, the Rishonim asks it's a little difficult because giving bad flavor is not the same as being inedible, right? What we really mean by the nevela is if it's inedible and can only be eaten, let's say, by a dog and not by humans, then it won't be nevela, okay? It won't be an isser nevela. Meaning if you were to eat it, which I don't know why you would if it's inedible, but let's say you were to eat it anyway, you wouldn't get lashes for it, okay? You wouldn't have been transgressing the lo taseh. It's not exactly the same as something that gives bad flavor, which is edible. But anyway, that's a question we're going to put aside. But with that, we're going to end our daf. So let's just do a quick review. We finished with the machloket. Is it a machloket tanaim? Abai and Rabba recha milta lav milta? Is it the same as the thing with the pot and the wine? We said in the end it's not. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a machloket tanaim. It could be they all actually agree with Abaye. And the machloket's actually in a unique case, which isn't really comparable. Then we went to this whole topic of notain tam. We showed that we paskin only if it gives good taste, like the Mishnah said, is it going to be forbidden in a mixture, right, of forbidden and non-forbidden items? And if it gives bad flavor, right, so if it's good flavor, it's going to be forbidden. If it gives bad flavor, it's going to be permitted. We saw that kind of everybody ends up holding that way, although Rish Lakish, we had a bit of a question about it. Rish Lakish, there were two versions of what he said, whether he was being more stringent about the application of notain tam lifgam asur, or whether he was being more lenient about it, if there's both lack of salt or too much salt, in addition to the bad taste of the forbidden item. Is that going to make it notain tam lifgam, which will be permitted or not? So the two versions. Then we went to the kind of categorization, tam and mamash versus tam below mamash. What actually you're forbidden? Both are forbidden, but one you get lashes for, one you don't. And then if it adds more bad taste to it, then it'll be permitted. And that's what we saw before, right? If the flavors it but gives it bad flavor, it'll be permitted. And even if it adds to something that was already not so great to begin with, like the second version of Rish Lakish. Then Rav Kahana had this statement about everybody says notain tam lifgam is mutar. Abai kind of questioned, maybe not Rish Lakish. And then we said, is it possible there is someone who permits? And right, it sounded like it from Rav Kahana's statement. And in fact, they say, yes, Rabbi Meir. And then, I'm sorry, is there someone who forbids it? Said notain tam lifgam is forbidden. And we said Rabbi Meir, and then we saw the machlok of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, and we brought each of their proofs. And with that, we finished today's daf. Wishing everyone a Shavua Tov. And for those on Zoom, I will see you back on Zoom tomorrow.